So we might jump into today's episode, which I'm really looking forward to. It is how to select comparable sales to determine the market value of the subject property. So this is obviously a topic that is near and dear to everyone who's looking to buy a property. And it's one of the trickier aspects of buying property, but it's one that you need to master to feel confident in the buying process and that you're paying a reasonable price and to ultimately have success without any remorse when you purchase. So Pete's going to take us through some presentations and slides that he does on this topic, but Cate also has a lot of wonderful and great insights to share as well. So might just hand it over to you, Pete, to kick us off, because you've done a fair bit of homework and preparation for this one.
I've actually done so much that I've decided to use it in class as well. So I've set this exercise for my students to see what appraisal price they come up with.
I love it, Pete. Two birds, one stone.
That's right.
Well done.
That's right. Okay, so recapping from a previous episode, because we have talked about different valuation methods. First one is comparable sales, which is what I'm going to demonstrate today with some real live case studies. So that's really, basically the property you're looking at is worth the same or similar to other comparable properties. The summation method, cost less depreciation, more used in asset valuation, like what is a piece of machinery worth, but often used for housing, especially new housing. Like if you're trying to compare the age of a new house to a house that might only be 2 or 3 years old, valuers will use that method. And the income capitalization method, which is basically valuing property on the income that it brings in. So in simple maths, if you're earning $100,000, if the property's earning $100,000 a year and you want a 5% return, then you would be willing to pay up to $2 million for that, because $100,000 is 5% of 2 million. So they're three of the main methods that we use for valuation. If we look at comparable sales, the main things you need to look for in a property are similar location. Ideally the same suburb. If it's not the same suburb, an adjacent similar suburb. But not every next door suburb is going to be suitable. Like the next door suburb might be very cheap because it's full of heavy industry, or it might be very expensive because there's a railway line or a major road that divides it, and the other suburb is very close to the water. So similar location, similar land size. So if the block that you want to buy is 700 square meters in size, you'd be looking generally at blocks of land that were, say, somewhere between 600 square meters to 800 square meters in size. Similar building size, and it's not so much the square meters of the house. One is the number of bedrooms. So if you've got a 3-bedroom house, you should be comparing it to other 3-bedroom homes. Next would be the number of living areas. Like 1 living area to 2 living areas can make a big difference in price. And then also number of bathrooms. 1 bathroom to 2 bathrooms can make a very big difference in price, especially if that second bathroom is an ensuite. Similar building condition. You can't compare something that is brand new with something that's 50 years old. Character or period style. So these are the sorts of properties that were built before World War II. There might be different styles, but if all of those properties were built before World War II, you can certainly compare between them. And ideally, we teach our students sold within 6 months to 3 months, but the market is so crazy now, you'd be looking at certainly no more than 3 months, 1-2 months max.
Great point, Pete. I'm saying to people in this current market, 6 to 8 weeks, that's about the cutoff, 8 weeks max, because the prices have been moving so aggressively.
Very true. Some other attributes we look at is topography. So one house might be on the high side of the road, the other house might be on the low side of the road. The house on the low side of the road may be more subject to flooding. Not a big deal, not as big a deal as some of the others that I mentioned, like location and size of the land. Environmental factors. If the property you're looking to buy is next door to a petrol station, Maybe there's been some leakage in the petrol tanks, which could cause some contamination. So you need to check that out. Accessibility, how easy is it to get in and out of your property? If it's on a main road, it's on a main road and it's going to devalue it anyway. But if there's a medium strip in front of you, maybe there's only one way that you can get into your property. There's no opportunity to do a right-hand turn. Utility services, it's probably more so in semi-rural or rural areas. Do you have mains water and do you have main sewage? Or are the other properties only on rainwater and septic tank? Zoning plays a very big role. I did a seminar last night actually on property development, and we looked at, we were trying to value one property and looking at two other properties that had sold very close to this property, both basically exactly the same size, but because one had a wider frontage, you could put 3 on there instead of 2. So one important note here, especially for development, don't just look at the size of the block, look at the frontage. Other improvements, some people place a lot of value on garages with pits. Does it have an outdoor kitchen? That can add value. A potential for an alternative use, if you're on a main road, maybe you can, and the zoning allows it, maybe you can convert the house to doctor's surgery. And any other factors. And probably the biggest one is the view. You know, you've got a house on the esplanade and you compare it with a house that's only one house back, not even one street back, but one house back. And that can make a very, very big difference.
Can I give you 2 more, Pete?
Yes, please, Kate.
Orientation, it's a big one. If something's got a north-facing rear, we can often see the differential between 2 very similar houses in the same street, north-facing versus south-facing, be as much as 15-20%. And the other one is a property that is subdivided, so a strata property, but if it doesn't have an owner's corporation. So let's say that the subdivision allows for driveways to each property individually. So you've been allowed to create the driveway, it might have been a long corner block. And so instead of being unit 1 of 23, unit 2 of 23, unit 3 of 23, you got 23 A, B and C. They don't share any land. They don't have any owners corporation governing their use, despite the fact that they're sharing walls and they look the same as what they could be if they were sharing a driveway. That makes a big difference.
Right. Thank you for that, Kate. Very, very interesting. The other thing we're looking at, sometimes if you need to come up with an exact number, then what we do is we reduce it to units of value. So dollars per square meter. So you get the sale price and you divide it by the size of the land, and you get the sale price and you divide it by the square meters of the house. And often you can see a common element. So, you know, if lots of 750 square meter blocks sold for $1,000 a square meter, and yours is 770 square meters, you could probably pretty confidently say that yours was worth 770,000 because we're just multiplying 770 by 1,000. Bit more difficult when you've got houses on it, but if there's only one variable, that is the size of the land or the size of the building, that works out very well. On bigger properties like farming land, we look at it dollars per hectare. Big, really, really big ones, we look at dollars per square meter. For development sites,
kilometre, do you mean, Pete?
Dollars per square kilometre. What did I say?
Metre.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Per unit site. So if the example that I gave before, even though it's the same size land, but you can put 3 on there instead of 2 because of the frontage, then the property that you can put 3 on is worth more than the other one. Or if you're subdividing a large plot of land, then you can value it per potential block. So how many blocks can you cut up from this one larger block? So that's just a very speedy overview of using comparable sales.
Now, one of the very tricky parts for people who are looking to buy property is how much they attribute to each of the various components that go into assessing one property vis-a-vis another. So maybe we can talk into some of those nuances And that, what you've just taken us through there, Pete, which is fantastic, is along the lines of the technical approach that a valuer takes. Is that right?
So maybe if I share my screen again, and I put up that particular slide. All right, so these are the main ones. Kate, what do you reckon? What out of all of those, what have we got there? 6. Which do you reckon is the most important, or which ones would have the greatest weight?
This is a really tough question because there's no right answer. They're all very, very relevant. Obviously, it is a tough one. In tandem, location and land size.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're buying an established property, because the dwelling itself won't hold a high inherent value. Older dwellings that have an inherent value are period properties. If you go into an estate on the fringe, though, we're not talking about period properties. We're not covering scarcity at all because they're all similar. Obviously, a property that was built last year will have a higher value than a property dating back to 1980. The 1980 property will be the dwelling will be just about worth 0 and it's all in the land. So I think it's really important to look at land size when we're talking about an established property.
Yeah, agreed. So, and one of the reasons that location and land are so important is because location is impossible to change. Land size you can change. You can, subdivide the land and make it smaller. You can pay extra and buy the neighbour's land. Building size you can change. You can add on, put extensions on. But the one thing you certainly can't change is location. And that's not just the suburb, not macro location, but it's also micro location, the street. Yeah. If I could just demonstrate with 2 properties, I'm sharing my screen so people will be able to see. Demonstrate with these 2 properties. 2 North Parade, 4 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 2 car parks, sold for $465 in July last year. The house next door, 4 North Parade, only 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, 2 car parks, same size land. I contacted the agent. Number 2 sold for $465. Number 4 sold for $800. And the condition is basically the same. The difference is its location. It's got the same address, but number 2 is right up against South Road, which is our main arterial north-south road. So it's very busy here.
You raise a really good point with this. I often have people saying to me, I'd love this house, but in a quieter street. And I say to them, you've just added 20-25% to that surcharge, and that's now outside of your budget. Yeah, I know, but I'd love this house. And we have to go through it again and again. And this is a great example of the discount that's on offer when you buy on a main road. Now, I will always tell someone about the difficulty that they'll have keeping a tenant, selling the property quickly in a not so hot market, and the things that they'll have to deal with, like road noise and lots of dust, etc. So if they're okay with that, and that's their ticket to being able to buy into a suburb that they ordinarily wouldn't have the budget for, well, then that's got to be a personal decision that comes from them, but it's not something I endorse.
Yeah, so again, illustrating what Kate was saying, how location is so important. Even 2 properties right next door to each other that are very, and one of them is actually bigger, sold for much, much less. Why? Because it's of its poor location, right on the main road.
And this hits on the fundamental challenge of assessing comparables. And that is, what components are different.
Yeah.
Because understanding the components that match up, that's it, the simpler part. But then what are the aspects and attributes that are different, and then how do you value them? That's the tricky part. That's why people go to university to get a degree in valuation. That's why people go to property experts who are assessing these things day in, day out, because that's what makes it tough for buyers out there. So really breaking it down into the various attributes like Pete has here, and then assessing a value to each and where it differs, coming up with that differential in valuation. That's the hard part, and that's why you have to get around to so many properties, look at so many sales, and build up that subject matter expertise over a period of time.
Very true. Very true. All right. So what I'd like to do now is put that theory into real life, and let's have a look at some properties, or one particular property, which is going to auction this Saturday. So I'm going to try and guesstimate what this particular property will sell for. So Kate and Dave, can you see this property? 58.
Sure can. Very pretty.
Excellent. All right. So let's just have a quick look at it. I'm not going to go through all the comparables like this, but just so you can see it. So we call that a symmetrical cottage. You can see that it hasn't been done up for a while. Beautiful wallpaper, beautiful timber lining, lovely carpet.
Pete, have you walked through this one?
No. So that's one of the provisos. I'm going to give you what I think it's worth, but I haven't been through it. I am going to the auction on Saturday.
Yep.
So I might change my price, because the one thing that worries me about wallpaper is you can't tell the integrity of the wall, the structure of the wall.
Yeah.
So,
and we don't know how level the floor is,
yeah.
and we don't know how much it has some bad smells. So if it's got damp smell or rising damp or anything that the photos don't show us, that's where I guess your online view is subject to change.
Yeah. All right. So they've got 650,000. I can tell you it's going to sell for a lot more than that. Now in South Australia, that means that the reserve cannot be more than 10%. So the reserve, we know, is going to be 715. I think it will sell for more than that. But in theory, according to the law, if it gets over 715, they have to sell it.
So it's on market at 715 guaranteed.
Correct. Yeah.
Does the auctioneer still announce that? Bother to announce?
No, in South Australia, we don't do that. We don't say, well, very rarely do we say it's on the market. Yeah.
So you're telling me if you were the last person with your hand in the air at 715, they wouldn't pass it in. They'd knock it down.
They have to.
Gee, I love South Australia. How refreshing.
All right. So what I want to do now is I'm going to show you 4 properties that I think are not comparable and explain quickly why, and then show you 4 properties that I think are comparable and explain why, and then at the end give you what I think it's going to sell for. So we've got a character house on 700 square meters and 3 bedrooms. Right.
And orientation, Pete?
Orientation is east-west.
Got it.
So 70 Haywood Avenue, another character house. But the main reason I am not using this as a comparable, it's a much smaller block of land, 450 square meters. And you can't tell from this photo, but this is the front house of a hammerhead. So there's a unit at the back, and they share a common driveway. So it's on community title. So there's a couple of reasons there, mainly the block's too small, and the fact that it's on community title is why I'm not using it. One pretty obvious one, this is a modern unit. I'm using a old house, not comparable. This one here is what we call a masonette. Yeah. So it's 2 houses together. And the reason I'm not using it, even though it's in a similar location, similar building size, it's a masonette. It's semi-detached.
And it's on half the land.
Yeah, and a smaller block. And another obvious one, even though it's in the same suburb, I'm not going to use this. It's a much smaller block and a much newer house. But the 4 that I am going to use, this one here. So 54 Clifford Street is only 2 houses away from 58 Clifford Street. So I will quickly go through these photos just so we can make a comparison. So pretty similar condition, right? Pretty similar condition. Same suburb, same land size, same everything, except this house was built in the 50s. And in South Australia, we love our character homes built before 1939. Not so much these, but it's 2 houses away, same size block, similar sized house. So it's not exactly the same, but for me, it's quite comparable. Then there's this one here. 11 Thanet Street, Brooklyn Park. Brooklyn Park is the neighbouring suburb to Torrensville. So the suburb is slightly worse, but similar land size, 673 compared to 697. Similar building size. The condition is much better here. All right, so we need to, well, when I say much better, it's still got lovely. So the kitchen is more modern, and the two important areas are kitchen and bathroom. So the kitchen is certainly more modern. It does have some classic wallpaper in the bedrooms. The bathroom is not much better than the other one, but certainly in better condition.
So with this one, you think the better condition of the property overall slightly offsets it being in the poorer suburb, which
yes,
makes it...
Yeah, it does, because the condition is a big game changer in old houses. Like, to buy a 100-year-old house which hasn't been done up for 100 years is very different to buying a 100-year-old house which has been renovated even in the last 10 or 20 years. It can be a big game changer. 4 North Parade, which I mentioned before, 4 North Parade, Torrensville. This is the one that sold for 800. So just quickly go through the property. So polished floorboards, nice kitchen. So certainly in a better condition. So same suburb, better condition. So not exactly the same, but I'm going to use that as a comparable.
Granted, it's very pretty, but you'll still get a lot of road noise from, is it South Terrace?
Yeah, because it's only one house away from the main road.
Yeah.
And that's the one that sold for 800. And then another symmetrical cottage, which is what 58 Clifford Street is. That's our subject property in the neighbouring suburb of Thevenard. Exactly the same size land, same number of bedrooms, but this has been, parts of it have been done up. So they are my comparables. What I want to show you now is a little chart that I have made up. Right, there we are. So if we just stick with the comparable properties, which are these 4 here, 54 Clifford Street, and we'll put these up on our show notes so you can click on the link and check it out for yourself. So a house 2 doors down sold for 724 in March. The house that was in better condition but in a slightly poorer suburb sold for 788 in March. 4 North Parade sold for 800 last month, and 10 Holland Street sold for 881 last month. So I've highlighted these here, these two, 54 Clifford Street and 11 Thanet, in bold, because I think they are the two most comparable. So in other words, I think this property is going to sell somewhere in between 724 and 788. And based on the fact that these sold 2 months ago, and you can see if they're similar, I have highlighted in green. So 54 Clifford Street, I've got 4 that are similar, all in green, and light green because it was built in 1950s. Some people may call it character, some may not. 11 Thanet Street, 2 components are really similar. North Parade, 2 components are similar. 10 Holland Street, Thevenard, 3 components down here are similar. So really the most similar, and it makes sense, is 54 Clifford Street, which is only 2 houses away. But my best guesstimate is on Saturday, the 22nd of May, this property is going to sell for 770,000.
I can't wait to hear the results of this auction. Now, I'm not licensed in South Australia, so all I can do is apply the knowledge that I have of the market from being a regular visitor there and look at your pros and cons and how you've compared your suburbs. I'm going to hedge a bet here, but say I think it will potentially touch 8. I think your result's going to start.
And I think it could in this crazy market. One of the reasons I picked Torrensville, Cate, is because it's the South Australian equivalent of Yarraville. So you can imagine those houses in Yarraville, I mean, they'll probably be worth twice as much, but You know what's really important in Yarraville? Obviously, being close to the Yarraville village is very important in Yarraville, and I'm sure there are other factors. In Torrensville, we have a linear park along the River Torrens. None of these houses were close to that. If they were, I would have added more value. Some parts of Torrensville are under the flight path. If it was under the flight path, I would have deducted some value. But yeah, look, in this crazy market, all it takes is two people to fall in love with it, and one is an alpha male with deep pockets, and you know, who knows where it'll go. But it would not surprise me if it hits 800. I would be very surprised if it sells for less than 770.
Yeah, great. All right, well, subject to its floors being wonky and rising
and I need to inspect it, that's right.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
All right. The bet's on,
Pete. Before we go into our gold nuggets, and it's a great masterclass there, Pete, with some fabulous insights from Cate. I think that Excel that you just put up there, like, it's very similar to what we do internally at Property Planning Australia, and we spread it across 10 to 15 items and then have those comparables, marketers, you know, it's very similar actually. I think that's the type of thing that, you know, buyers can do for themselves, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. But that, you know, actually having that tracking system in an Excel like you just showed, Pete, is a perfect example of what buyers can do.
Right. So, and you weight those, don't you, Dave?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
We had some questions for Pete to ask.
Yes.
So when is this methodology a challenge or impossible?
Yeah.
Like in a market like we're experiencing right now, because those properties sold in March and the market was very different 2 months ago to what it is today. You saw what's happening in Sydney. You know, that's 9% over 3 months. That's like, that's almost 1% a week. You know, that's huge. So that's why, you know, it wouldn't surprise me, Cate, if your guess of 800 is correct, because the market is so crazy and people love character homes in these inner western suburbs, just like they do in Melbourne.
Yeah, so that's one time when it's really hard to use this method. Another time is when there's very limited comparable sales. So let's say we pick an area that hasn't had a sale of a period house in a long time, or if we have sales that haven't settled yet that we're reliant on, because valuers will use a different methodology. So it depends on what you're conducting your research for. If it's to pay the right price, that's a different motivation to making sure that you don't have a valuation shortfall. They're two different things. So they're the times when this methodology can be really difficult. And also, I find this every now and then when the house is so scarce, like super scarce. Yes. We had an old church hall, like a kid's Sunday school hall in Yarraville that was on the market for a couple of different series, and it was impossible to try and put a valuation on it, because who wants to buy a residentially zoned ex-school hall with, you know, plaques on the front of it and make it into something groovy? Well, the person who has managed to do that has done a great job, and it's incredible, but it was really hard to assess its value.
It's a good example, and it's worth remembering for people who are planning to build a property that's really unique is, firstly, if it's really unique, probably a small percentage of the population are after that type of property. So that obviously there's less demand for that type of property, and obviously we know demand drives up property values. But then secondly, as Cate just mentioned, it's really difficult for people to assess the value because there's no direct comparables. So we do have a number of questions. We'll go through some more of these questions. What are the limits of useful bank valuer comparable sales, guys?
If I could just join this one with the other one, which is, when is an agent phone call to double check important? Because that's what I did yesterday when I was doing some research. So I rang as many agents as I could to find the circumstances of the sale. You know, did they sell at auction? Was it private treaty? And the one that I was impressed with was number 4 North Parade, Torrensville. And this is one thing that valuers, in particular bank valuers, don't take notice of, because in their defense, they don't have the time to ring up all the real estate agents and get all the information. this particular company is renowned for excellent digital marketing. And so they created enough hype that they sold this property before auction at a much higher price than the anticipated reserve. So bank valuer, not just bank valuers, I don't think valuers place enough value on how real estate marketing can influence, in particular, owner-occupiers' buying decisions. You know, if they're really smart and can hype it up and really push the lifestyle factors, it's amazing the prices that you can get. So that's why I think it's important for our listeners or anyone else that's looking to buy a property is find out the properties that have sold. It should still have the real estate agent's details. Ring them up and see what information you can get. Maybe you found out that a property that you're looking at as a comparable sold really cheaply because it's notorious in that area because some crime was committed. And so,
or
you know,
because the tenant was really difficult with giving access, or they lived like grubs, or because the agency didn't do a great job. You know, if I've had properties that it's been a real headache to try and get through. Go through the open. Go through the open. Well, if the only open is on Saturday at 11:30, I'm probably not going to get through it because I'm on the other side of town bidding. But when you get vendors or agents that block access and limit people's ability to view it or ability to get building inspectors through, well, no surprises, it might flop at auction. And those situational impacts on a price absolutely deserve a phone call. And to your point, Pete, whenever I've had an anomaly result that looks ridiculously high, sometimes there's a personal reason why that buyer was happy to challenge the other seemingly irrational buyer to get it. It might be that mum lives next door and she needs help with the kids. Anything's possible.
Yeah,
really good point. You know, a pre-existing sale or a comparable sale doesn't necessarily equate to gospel as the value to that property or the property therefore you're trying to compare it against, because of those circumstances that you've just described. And, you know, if you link it to your one, Pete, you've said 770, Cate said it might go above 800. Let's say there's two people who really want it and, you know, might get up to 820. So you put a ring around somewhere between 770 to 820, and then it's a matter of, well, how much do the individuals want it? You know, what is the purpose they're purchasing it for? How much surplus cash flow are they going to have after they settle on the property? Therefore, they can be willing to pay more for it versus someone who's, you know, basically going to be skinflint after they settle on the property. So, you know, there's all these little factors that play into any specific purchase, and you've got to weigh those things up for yourself as an individual, don't you?
And timing is everything. I've got a really good case in point, and in a little street in Footscray called Latrobe Street, and we purchased a single fronted property in reasonable condition for a client, and that was pretty much in the thick of the election, the federal election coming up. So sentiment was at an all-time low. The market had taken a hit, and in 6 months we bought that for 700 on the nose. 6 months later, 842 for the one next door. Identical floor plan, orientation, land size, arguably a little bit inferior. How does that happen? 20% gain.
Yeah.
Bless you.
I think that's the first time we've had a sneeze on the podcast. When are comparable sales not reliable?
When they're anomalies.
Yeah.
When they've got an invisible detractor, such as a big fat easement running through the backyard, or it's a different zone. They're the things that you won't necessarily see on the ad. You might have to pour through a contract and be in the know. And that's difficult to do, which is why the phone call is necessary.
We've probably touched on this a little bit. Anything else to add on what can be invisible that buyers miss?
Or what's behind the wallpaper?
Yeah.
That can be a hard one. Yeah.
Sordid history. There's some of the things, maybe illegal works that aren't super obvious until a building inspector says, no, that's not kosher, it hasn't got certificates.
Maybe future developments nearby that'll impact and the buyer isn't aware of.
Most definitely. If next door on the other side is doing a second story renovation and it's threatening natural light or privacy, that will put a lot of buyers off if they know about it.
Absolutely. When is an agent phone call to double check important? And Pete, you've touched on.
Yeah, like when Kate said, there's an anomaly.
Mm.
It's a price seems extraordinarily high or extraordinarily low. Make a phone call.
Yeah. What role does zoning play? We've touched on that a little bit. Anything else to add there?
Yes, if it's a zone that isn't covered by a residential loan, that will absolutely come in miles under. And likewise, if it's a title type that won't be forgivable at an 80% loan to value ratio, that's something that you have to be aware of, because if buyers are in the know, they won't be risking their deposit. You'll go from having potentially 5 bidders to maybe no bidders. The thing will pass in and languish. So you've absolutely got to know what fits lending policy and what doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. They're rare, but if you miss checking, it's going to cost you money.
Yeah.
Last question from our producer. How far back can you go in time before the sales aren't comparable?
I agree with what Kate said. In this market, 6 to 8 weeks. Normally, 3 to 6 months we'd be happy with, but in this crazy market, you'd measure it in weeks, not months.
And if you are looking at a property that's quite rare and you need to go back even years, you need to get out your charts and understand how to overlay capital growth. And if you use enough data points, you can get it right. It's an approximation. It's not a perfect science, but we can look at properties that are limited in supply and, you know, very rare, and go back to 2019, 2017, and you're then broadly overlaying capital growth figures, but that gives you at least a peg in the sand.
That's the caveat, isn't it? When it's a really unique property and you have to go back a longer period of time, but you need to get your calculator out as well to know what the market's done over that period. Fabulous. Well, look, that has been a very fulsome episode, and we've covered a lot of gold